Today, I'll be analyzing government intervention in healthcare, focusing on B. Jesse Hill's article about medical necessity under the ACA or Affordable Healthcare Act. I'll explore whether government definitions of medical necessity threaten the constitutional rights and compare Hill's perspective with Rosenbaum's supportive view of the ACA. The government's involvement in healthcare is something that continuously sparks debate. On one hand, it promotes access for patients, and on the other hand, it may threaten the choice of care. Hill's article questions whether defining medical necessity under the ACA interferes with constitutional privacy and autonomy. My goal is to evaluate whether her argument holds up. Hill raises a few important questions throughout the article. How severe must harm be to yourself to justify getting treatment? Should your health include your mental health and social well-being? Most importantly, who is the person who gets to decide? Is it your doctor, the patients, insurers, or even legislators? These questions highlight the complexity of defining health and the risk of oversimplifying medical judgment. Hill's argument begins by highlighting that health is an ambiguous and context-dependent concept, making one single, universal government definition unrealistic and problematic. She argues that giving the government control over medical necessity is flawed due to the fact that political and financial pressures can potentially override patients' needs, limiting their access to specialized care. Instead, she suggests that regulating the process of decision-making rather than medical judgment itself. This is a reconstruction of my argument. Premise 1 is stating that individuals have a constitutional right to privacy and autonomy in personal medical decisions. Premise 2, government definitions of medical necessity under the ACA directly interfere with these rights by limiting patients and doctor's choice. Premise 3, laws or policies that violate constitutional rights are impermissible. Therefore, government control over defining medical necessity under the ACA is constitutionally impermissible. This argument is a deductive argument, and it's also a valid argument because the conclusion logically follows after the three premises. Even though it's logical, it still is unsound because when you look over premise 2, this premise is questionable and it's very broad and it can be left up to specific interpretation. The ACA does influence coverage, but it doesn't directly define what is considered medical necessity. Limiting coverage, it's not exactly the same thing as limiting autonomy. The patient still has a choice. The patient still can receive care and has access to that. So the argument, it is technically valid, but it's partially unsound. Since it is broad and left up to the interpretation, it does weaken the claim that the government is directly the one responsible for infringing on a patient's constitutional rights. Looking at this from a more supportive perspective, there's an article by Sarah Rosenbaum, and she offers a contrasting view. She mainly argues that the ACA expands access and protects patients by regulating insurance practices and preventing discrimination. From this perspective, government involvement can actually increase patient choice rather than restrict autonomy. She also states that the ACA is not the one that is directly responsible for defining medical necessity, and that is left up to the doctors and the insurers. So though the ACA is determining the type of care, the main choice ultimately is left up to the doctor, so they're still able to have more access to care. So we see a tension throughout both of these articles. Hill emphasizes autonomy while Rosenbaum highlights the public health benefits. What I mean by that, Hill's basically stating that the government is directly interfering with the patient's right to choose where they want to receive care, who they want to receive the care from, and the type of care that they need. So if they need a certain surgery, the ACA is saying that they can't have it because it's not medically necessary, while the doctor is saying this is something that you need. So it would be considered medically necessary. The definition is so broad because it's not one size fits all. What's right for one person doesn't necessarily mean it's right for somebody else. So to say this specific thing in no circumstance is not medically necessary, that's where it becomes problematic. That's when the constitutional concerns come into play because they do limit that choice ultimately. Now, on the other hand, Rosenbaum is stating that the AVA expands access by making sure that all providers and policies have the same coverage for everyone, no matter what. So there is an ethical challenge in balancing the individual rights with that broader access and fairness. The policies must protect autonomy while also ensuring that the healthcare is still accessible to everyone. The main takeaway from these articles is really that policies must strive to find a balance between stepping in too much and not stepping in enough. So they have to be careful to watch over potential government overreach. It is necessary, but the policies have to be carefully designed to also balance the patient protection and promote equal and effective healthcare options for everybody.